I have been writing most of my life, both personally and professionally, but mostly I was an old newspaper reporter. That sounds wrong. I was a newspaper reporter back when there used to be newspapers and there used to be reporters, which does not seem to be the case anymore. For 21 years, 10 years as a reporter, 11 years writing a column for a series of local newspapers, and so most of my writing has been kind of essays, a lot of poetry. This is my first real foray into a fiction novel. And so I have a very good friend who said, well, it's semi-autobiographical. I said, yes, it is. However, the emphasis is heavy on semi. There are some nuggets here, as there are with any fiction, of truth about my life, and then I built a story around that. So I hope that you enjoy it. And what I'll do is I'm going to read the first chapter to the Acorn Wars, and then I'll read a couple of pieces, short pieces, from some of the other books that I've written. We have a time limit for the library. They said we only have 3 or 4 hours. Is that okay with you? All right, good. So,
what was your impetus for writing this book?
Life. I am adopted. So when you look up here and you look at my last name and you go, really, Hernandez? There's a reason for that. Because I do not have a drop of Mexican blood in me. However, by association with my father's family, of which I'm very, very, very proud, I consider myself half Mexican by association. But growing up in kind of two different worlds led to some interesting circumstances. And so this is about a lot of that. Okay? All right. So, from the Acorn Wars. And by the way, this chapter does not explain the title. You have to buy the book and read that chapter to get the title. It's bad form to laugh at a dead body, especially your own father's. Miles Ayala knew this, yet he laughed loudly as he stared at Michael Ayala's lifeless frame. The body lay half covered under a sheet on a stainless steel table in a cramped holding room just off the emergency room at Cross of Christ Hospital, routinely shortened by locals to just the Cross. You still owe me lunch, Miles smiled and shook his head. Is everything all right, sir? The question came from behind Miles. What? Miles turned toward the voice. He hadn't realized someone had come into the holding room with him. A large black woman in nurse's garb stood a few feet away. A tag on her uniform said, Lynn. He knew from his days as a newspaper reporter that last names were no longer provided for security reasons. Her right eyebrow cocked, she stayed a few feet behind Miles, out of arm's reach and near the door into the larger waiting area. Miles stepped towards her. She crouched a bit and edged toward the door. For a second, he was confused. What the hell's wrong with her? Why is she acting so strange? Then he understood. Having spent his share of time in hospital emergency rooms in his years as a journalist, it dawned on him that she was positioning herself between him and the exit just in case he flipped out. He didn't blame her. A man talking to a dead body didn't seem too bad, but you never know. He'd seen people lose control over less. One can never be too careful working in an emergency room, he knew. Death had a way of tightening reason like a guitar string until it snapped. Oh, I'm sorry, Miles said, raising his hands and smiling, trying to diffuse the tension. I didn't mean to frighten you. Yes, I'm fine. Another softer laugh. This is my dad, Miles said, staring down at his father, who was still in his work uniform, though his jacket and shirt were open. Only an hour into death, Michael's skin, usually a rich, dark cocoa, now appeared chalky, rubbery, wrinkly, and pitted. Michael was 51, not young, but not exactly old either. In fact, only 20 years older than me. The thought came from nowhere and startled Miles. We were supposed to meet today at Berghoff's to celebrate my birthday next week. That's nice, Lynn said. Her tone conveyed more professional courtesy than actual concern. Do you both work downtown? Yes, well, I mean, we did. He runs security for a private company, and I'm the director of communications for a PR firm. So you're from Chicago? No, we both live in the suburbs. My dad was a cop for 31 years. He retired about a year ago and took this new job downtown. And I was a newspaper reporter. I started working downtown about 6 months ago. We'd meet a couple of times each month for lunch. There won't be any lunch now. Miles stomped the blizzard's melting remnants from his soaked shoes. Well, forgive me for asking, and I don't mean any disrespect, but what's so funny about you going to lunch with your dad? An impatient tone and semi-scowl suggested that she might have other, perhaps more important things to do than sit here and try to decipher the mysteries of some suburban wahoo's life story. Miles raised his eyes to her. It's funny because he wouldn't have shown up anyway. Her right eyebrow peaked again. You see, Miles said, my whole life, my dad would tell friends and family and coworkers, anyone, that he'd meet them for coffee, lunch, dinner, whatever. Well, that's nice, except that he'd never go. Miles's voice rose a little. People would laugh and tease him about it, thinking it was funny. Personally, I thought it was rude, even cruel sometimes. But he had this charm. A wisp of sarcasm seeped through his wry smile. Everyone just loved my dad. They never understood that they were the joke. And his name was Michael? She flipped through the pages of his dad's medical chart that obviously included his name. She was trying to make polite conversation and push the topic to a less awkward subject, Miles knew. Still, he never passed an opportunity to chat with someone, to connect in any way, even with a person who obviously cared nothing about what he was saying. Miles craved camaraderie and approval like a diabetic craves sugar. Sometimes he'd hear himself sharing intimate details with total strangers and think, too much information, and yet he couldn't stop himself. Right, Michael, or Mikey, his family always called him Mikey. He was the baby of the family. His voice lagged for a second as his memory pulled down the chestnut family tale, like the arm in an old jukebox selecting the chosen 45 from the back and plumping it onto a turntable. There's this picture of my dad hanging at my great-aunt's house from when he was a year old. It's still there, believe it or not. He had long curly hair like a girl and beautiful brown eyes. Miles chuckled at the image, as vivid now in his mind's eye as if he were standing in his aunt's living room. I used to tease him, you're either the prettiest boy or the ugliest girl I've ever seen. Then without warning, a wrenching ball exploded from his gut as if he'd been punched. His head dropped involuntarily, like one big tear onto his father's exposed chest. I'll give you some privacy. The nurse started to back out of the room. No, I'm so sorry. Miles wiped the tears from his cheeks, surprised and irritated by his own outburst. I'm not usually emotional. Jesus, I never cry. Another wave of hot tears crashed in. Angry, confused words erupted from between strangled sobs like lava burbling from a volcanic fissure. What the hell, he demanded of his own flailing psyche. I've seen people die and then had to talk to the families and write about it. Miles struggled to catch his breath. Finally, enough air seeped into his lungs to expel more frustration with his own perceived weakness. Christ, this is stupid. Miles choked back tears, trying to regain control. But the rivers continued to flow over his cheeks, soaking his neck and his collar. Don't apologize, Lynn said. You have every right to cry. That's your father lying there. A soft, consoling smile framed her practiced yet sincere words of support. The kind of smile adults give to children who've scraped a knee, designed to hush cries, ease pain, restore order. Thank you, Miles said, grateful for her gentle absolution. But her kindness did little to ease his consternation. Miles remained flustered by his emotional outburst. All these tears after the years of animosity, anger, embarrassment, and pain, physical and psychic, that Michael had caused so many, including himself, but most especially Miles's mother. More pain than Miles could excuse or explain. More than anyone not intimately familiar with Michael, the charming clown, the hard-shelled softy, could accept or understand. So much so that Miles asked himself the questions again that he posed in his heart so many times. Who is this man, really? Can I forgive him for what he's done? Is it enough to simply say he's my father? And if he is my father, then who am I? The potential answers were perhaps even scarier now in his own burgeoning fatherhood than they had been in a lifetime of childhood. Then, almost as quickly as they'd started, his tears stopped. He felt strangely empty, void of feeling. A cacophony of chaos rose in place of the short-lived quiet. The former reporter in him took over. His dad used to say that good cops were cops all the time, not just when they were on the clock. Reporters were the same way, Miles thought as he mentally noted the litany of noise. Rattling gurneys, paramedics shouting orders to nurses, crashing metal doors, streams of gangbangers yo-yo-yoing obscenities, emergency radios clicking and squawking, televisions blaring in the nearby waiting room, cops chattering with medical staff, taking notes for reports, a few asking nurses for their phone numbers. The poor and homeless begging whatever free help they could get, babies screeching, trying to explain the pain that they did not understand in the only language they had. Life, jarring, arrogant, sharp, unbowed, brassy, unrelenting, pounding, unsympathetic, and most of all, loud, slapped him hard and yanked him back to the reality of the moment. He turned to Nurse Lynn. "Is there a phone I can use? I have to call my mother." Now the work of death began.